Episode 1 of Our Beloved Summer begins in May 2011 with an introduction to 19-year-old Choi Young. He's in class, but angsty over being filmed. His fellow student, Yoon Soo, has known Choi Young since 10th grade. Out of 267 students, Young is ranked straight bottom. Yoon Soo, meanwhile, is pretty ill-tempered and determined to be number one. The thing is, this documentary being filmed has placed both together, intent on filming the best and worst students together to see how they get on for a month. But you know what they say about opposites attract, eh? Anyway, the pair continue to grow more and more annoyed with one another. There's some pretty hilarious scenes depicting this, from spilling food on one another to Young laughing in class over a comic he's reading. This eventually leads to the pair both interviewed, where they point out how annoying and how much they hate the other. Ironically, these two are an online sensation. Students, businessmen and adults alike all love their documentary videos. Cut forward to the present and Yoon Soo is struggling. She's classed as mediocre by the boss at Run Company, but she fights back, showing that she has ambition and a ruthless edge. She's backed into a corner and promises to sign a top artist called Ko-Oh to her cause. So what happened to Choi Young? Well, it turns out he has a friend called Jae-young whom he's pretty close to. In a, perhaps obvious, turn of events, it's revealed that Choi Young is actually artist Ko-Oh. He's been keeping his identity a secret for a while now. He even rejects a live drawing exhibition to keep himself hidden. That evening though, in her drunken state, Yoon Soo does some research online around Ko-Oh. At the same time, Jae-young catches up with his boss over his next documentary project. He wants to move into environmental issues, but Park Dong-il is having none of it. Now, Dong-il was actually one of the men responsible for filming the big hit documentary with Yoon Soo and Choi Young. In the morning, Choi Young receives a call from New Jersey. She's bought one of his drawings in the past, and she's a pretty big deal, given she's an idol singer. She wants to meet up, but despite Jae-young's enthusiasm, Choi Young is not so sure. He senses that New Jersey just wants a free drawing. In the wake of all this, Yoon Soo bites the bullet and decides to meet with the man she's been blowing off for the past 4 dates. However, when she shows up, things immediately grow awkward. He brings up her commitment to work and how she's been standoffish with him. Eventually he chuckles to himself, shaking his head and claiming she's not actually worth his time. Yoon Soo is left awkwardly wondering what to do next. The thing is, Mr. Kang, the man she pitched a business idea to earlier in the episode, is actually sitting at the table across the room. He's heard everything, and he agrees to let her join him. Hilariously, they're both wearing the same shirt. The two begin drinking, but Yoon Soo is very clearly growing more drunk by the minute. The pair don't have anything to talk about beyond work, but do wind up growing closer together. Is there romance in the air, I wonder? In the morning, Choi Young answers the door and finds Yoon Soo there waiting for him. As we soon find out, they actually dated for 5 years in the past, but things have grown sour between them. Their breakup hurt both of them badly, which is clear to see when Young grabs a spray bottle and immediately douses her in the face. Episode 2 of Our Beloved Summer begins 50 days into Yoon Soo and Choi Young dating. They're both at school, things are going well, and the pair are flirting with one another. Cut forward another 700 days and Yoon Soo is ill, in bed and clearly feeling under the weather. Choi Young gives her some tough love, lightly slapping her on the head and telling her to have some porridge. The pair have a tendency to play what if during their time together, which certainly gets under Young's skin. He promises to be there for her no matter what, even if they end up with a long-distance relationship. The final time of playing what if lands on a big question. What if we break up? Yoon Soo quizzes. Young is adamant that's not going to happen, but Yoon Soo pushes the question further, receiving a more honest answer. Young promises to spray her in the face with water and throw salt at her. True to his word, we cut forward to the present to see Young making good on his promise with the water. Where's the salt? Yoon Soo asks casually. With the ice broken, Young and Yoon Soo head inside and begin talking. Young rejects the notion that he's Ko-Oh, but Yoon Soo has done her homework. She knows it's true. How? Well, New Jersey uploaded a photo to social media, and in the back is a very blurry Choi Young drawing. Young is much more cocky now that the ball is in his court. Yoon Soo makes her pitch, but he immediately refuses to get involved. Now, it's partly because of what happened between them, but also Young's reluctance to be in the public eye. Young's manager, Yoon Ho, soon comes bounding in though. New Jersey has arrived, and that's reason enough for Yoon Soo to leave and for Young to make good on his promise and throw salt at Yoon Soo on the way out the door. In her absence, New Jersey asks Young to draw some buildings for her. She's struggling to find joy and believes this could be the ticket. With crossed arms, she questions Ung's commitment and whether he's really a fan. After all, he's very distracted but for good reason. Out in the alleyway, Yin-Soo tries to work out what she's going to do about work. Jae-young shows up though, and the pair wind up talking about old times. There, Jae-young amusingly retorts that Choi-young has been practicing that salt move numerous times before. As we cut across to Choi-young himself, he wonders whether he was too harsh with the salt or not. When Yin-Soo shows up at work the next day, Mr. Jang is there to fill in the blanks from her drunken endeavor. That night, she dropped to her knees and began sobbing that she doesn't have an umbrella even, though she's holding one in her hands. Unfortunately, the embarrassment doesn't stop there. As flashes from her drunken night bleed through, she also told Chang's driver that her boss is a sociopath and a cold-hearted man. It's absolutely hilarious, but as she apologizes, Jang brushes it off and tells her to focus on the project. When they head to the exhibition though, awkwardness ensues. Yunho learns about the big opportunity this could be for Ung and drags him along. Yunho does all the talking, excitedly chirping about the project and almost unveiling his true identity. Eventually they leave, but Yunho makes a comment about how Jang and Yin-Soo look like a couple. In their absence, Yin-Soo breaks the news that she doesn't think she'll be able to work with Ko after all. Jang has more news for her though. Specifically what happened outside her house during her drunken night. Specifically, details about breaking up with Ung 5 years back. In the present, Jang tells her to separate her personal feelings from professional obligations. If she can bring him on board, well, they're going to get someone else to fill that slot. As the episode closes out, Jae-young comes to a big decision. He wants to film the documentary again. And just like that, the epilogue picks up with Yin-Soo and Choi-young on camera. Will this spark the flames of romance? Episode 3 of Our Beloved Summer begins with Choi-young in the hot seat. With the camera on him, Ung decides to give 10 reasons why he hates Yin-Soo. In order to showcase this, we cut back in time and see moments of Yin-Soo's various flaws play out. I won't list them all here, but there are 10 in total, spread out across the episode. The thing is, we also see another side of her, which contradicts everything Ung has just said, including moments of her being selfless and romantic. That is, until she breaks up with Ung out of the blue. Back in the present, Ung continues to deliberate over the live painting. While he contemplates whether to do this or not, he instead doubles down on his other work. Ung calls New Jersey, who plays it cool despite being really excited about getting his call. Ung is going to take up her idea of drawing buildings, but as it's commissioned work, he wants to see the buildings firsthand. As they arrange a meet, Yunho happens to be listening intently. He's definitely a little annoyed that he's not the one to arrange this, given he's the manager here. After setting things up, Jae-young shows and pitches Choi-young the idea of the documentary. This, of course, is the cliffhanger from episode 2. Anyway, he's completely against the idea, although Jae-young spins this as a good opportunity. Choi-young is having none of it. Now, some of this stems from how Choi-young acted after the breakup with Yin-Soo. We've heard he's a mess, but his craziness is unrivaled, especially as we see him go off the rails. Further flashbacks show him throwing himself into doing stocks, exercising vigorously and trying his best to keep himself busy. The thing is, nothing seems to work. Ung is still miserable. However, this eventually sees him stumble upon drawing, as his room is strewn with numerous pictures of buildings. But is all of this worth the risk of bringing old feelings out to the surface again? Jae-young seems to think so, working hard to try and set this up in the present. Interestingly, the school life videos between Ung and Yin-Soo begin trending again online. Yin-Soo is intrigued and decides to settle in and watch those videos. She scoffs at the naivety of her old self, bemoaning Choi-young for being lazy. The thing is, the videos also show a sense of innocence and playfulness that's lacking from both their lives right now. Fate has a funny way of bringing two people together. After being apart for 5 years, having never run into each other, all of a sudden they both seem to cross paths all the time. When the pair both spill their groceries outside, they end up talking. Yin-Soo winds up Ung though, telling him that the company are going to go for an alternate artist known as Nue. He's a knockoff artist and apparently nowhere near good enough. Only that's not okay with her clients. Everyone is counting on Yin-Soo, and they don't want anyone else other than Ko Jae-young meets Yin-Soo at the office, as her colleagues debate over whether Yin-Soo is dating him or not. Regardless, they head out together, where Jae-young pitches her the idea of the documentary. Jae-young certainly talks a big game, discussing the precious nature of life and preserving a snapshot of one's life. Speaking of preserving a life, New Jersey heads home, still reeling over Ung not messaging her back. She's torn over what to do, messaging her friends and receiving mixed messages back. When she heads online, New Jersey checks out Yoonho's Instagram and notices pictures of Choi-young, drunk. Now, just prior to this, Choi-young comes up with a genius idea, which we're frustratingly kept out the loop of. But also confirmation that Choi-young will work in the project. All of this is part of his master plan to make Yeon-soo suffer. During the epilogue, we cut back and see Yeon-soo's nonchalance to breaking up with Choi-young. Her best friend Sol-yi watches her, believing she's keeping her feelings bottled up. Well, when Yeon-soo heads home, away from everyone, she heads into the bathroom and begins crying. She does care, but what drove her to actually break up with Choi? Episode 4 of Our Beloved Summer begins with Yeon-soo and Choi-young disagreeing over who liked whom first. One thing's for sure, the final day of the shoot is where everything changed. With the camera out of battery, Jae-young heads off to get replacements, while Long and Yeon-soo found themselves alone. With no cameras about, the pair are awkward. It's also the first time Young started worrying about Yeon-soo. Realizing she's cold, he wrapped his t-shirt around her shoulders. Young makes it out that was a really romantic gesture, but Yeon-soo has other thoughts. His gesture is clumsy in her eyes, and he makes a big fuss about it, holding his arms as he winds up freezing cold. Before filming begins between the pair, we cut to Choi-young and Yeon-soo arriving to see Jae-young. They both have terms for the documentary, which are handed over for Jae-young to read. Now, Jae-young intends to set a static camera up for Young at home, while for Yeon-soo, they have the green light from Mr. Jang to allow them to film at her workplace. The filming begins and the stark differences between the two are plain to see. While Young naps and then works alone, Yeon-soo collaborates with her team. Still, it doesn't stop one of her colleagues, Bang Yi-hoon, walking past with a work plaque. Jae-young starts to feel the pressure. These two are almost intentionally sabotaging the project. There's absolutely no salvageable material, and the lack of conflict between the pair is bound to irritate viewers. Jae-young knows this and tries to come up with a solution. As Choi-young heads home and has a nap, he believes he's dreaming when Yeon-soo shows up. As he reaches out and touches her face tenderly, he realizes that this is real and wakes up with a start. Awkwardness obviously ensues, until Choi-young invites her down to his basement to see his drawings. One of those happens to be his drawing for the school, a beautiful painting that Yeon-soo accidentally ruined by jogging his pen across the page. Feeling bad, Yeon-soo did her best to save the picture back then, adding Tipex to try and erase the damage. The thing is, he actually kept the picture all this time. Unfortunately, it sparks another fallout between the two, which sees them have second thoughts about continuing on with the documentary. During filming the next day, things take a turn for the worst. Articles spread online regarding plagiarism claims for Young. When Jae-young and Yoon-ho find out, they deliberate over the best way of tackling this. In fact, unbeknownst to our male protagonist, Yeon-soo actually begins to collect evidence to show Ko-oh is in the right, and the plagiarism is a low blow from the copycat artist. In the morning, Mr. Jang immediately asks about the plagiarism and brings it up. With Yeon-soo there too, he vehemently declines the allegations and stands by that his work is original. With this sorted out, he immediately brings up Son's party, and confirms Yeon-soo will be there too, which seems to sweeten the deal. This is a big deal too, and despite agreeing to it, Young relies on New Jersey for help, given she's always on point with fashion. Of course, she interprets this as an opportunity for the pair to grow closer together. Choi-young tries on a number of different outfits, while New Jersey too shares the spotlight with a bunch of lavish outfits. As a thank you, the pair head out for food together. Tteokbokki to be precise. Choi-young is surprised by her taste in food, but she admits that fame comes at a cost. People have clearly misinterpreted her, but we've seen New Jersey has a heart of gold deep down, despite a pretty bad first impression. She believes that Choi-young is truthful with his art too. Yeon-soo also believes him, but struggles to send a text message over to confirm as much. Son's party goes ahead, and both Yeon-soo and Choi-young get dressed up for the occasion. When they lock eyes, they're both awkward and taken aback by how well they've sharpened up. Jae-young is there too, making sure everything is filmed. Once there though, Choi-young stays by the buffet table where he runs into Nue. It turns out they've both been invited, presumably to cause fireworks between the pair. "You're always the one who ruins me," Choi-young says through gritted teeth when he confronts Yeon-soo about this, believing her to be in on this. He turns and leaves the party. During the epilogue, we see more of the rainy moment from school. The pair smile and get along well, with Choi-young admitting at that moment that he doesn't dislike her. In fact, he admits that he likes her. As the pair look at one another, everything slows down as Jae-young happens to watch. Episode 5 of Our Beloved Summer picks up in the year 2000, with Choi-young and Jae-young first meeting in school. Both share the same name, but their fates are very different. Jae-young sensed early on that Choi-young was feeling lonely and ended up befriending him. The thing is, it's Jae-young who's the one who feels alone, always confined to the shadows while his best friend hogs the spotlight. While Choi-young's family are supportive and loving, Jae-young's are anything but. Despite pangs of jealousy starting to seep in, Choi's sharing nature and good heart allowed him to, in his own words, imitate happiness. Remember that love triangle that's been teased this season? Well, it actually comes from Jae-young. He's always been fond of Yeon-soo since school. He also noticed Choi-young looking at her in the hall and decided not to pursue this, taking a step back. In the present, Yeon-soo is disappointed in Mr. Jang's decision to essentially manufacture drama by including New on this lineup without telling Choi-young first. Yeon-soo had nothing to do with this of course, but that's not what Choi-young believes. When he storms out, Jae-young takes him home, but he has difficulty articulating his true feelings to Jae-young. This is, of course, a throwback to moments we've seen in the past where Choi-young has always had an emotionally immature core. Despite knowing she hasn't technically done anything wrong, when the cameras start rolling the next day, Yeon-soo tries to make a better image for herself. She rings Choi-young to apologize, but he fails to pick up. Now, Yoon-ho also catches wind of what happened and hurries over to see Choi-young. With the cameras off for now, Yoon-ho encourages Choi-young to actually be more professional, so it doesn't look like he just sits around and eats all day. So naturally, what better way to spark the flames of inspiration than heading to a museum? Once there, Choi delivers a passionate speech about art, but it turns out Jae-young's camera has run out of battery, cutting him short. In the absence of the cameras, Jae-young does the right thing and sticks up for Yeon-soo, telling Choi he's being silly, and that she would never betray him like that. He also goes on to reveal that he knows Choi still likes Yeon-soo, even after all these years. Jae-young doesn't have to do this, and you can tell it pains him so, but he's also a very loyal friend too. Jae-young still has a job to do after all, and he turns his attention to New Jersey instead. She recognizes Jae-young from 4 years back, and the pair wind up talking. Elsewhere, Yeon-soo enjoys her day off with best friend Sol-yi. The cameras are still filming of course, as Sol-yi constantly calls Yeon-soo a crazy BCH, before turning the attention to her crazy ex who cheated on her. As she calls him out and reveals how well she's doing, everything goes awry. The group booking she had phones up, and cancels at the last minute. The pub is clearly not doing well, and Sol-yi is despairing. However, the camera crew have an idea, and bring in Jae-young and Choi-young to the pub. It's the perfect opportunity to bring Yeon-soo and Choi-young together and potentially open up the doors for these two to actually talk openly with one another. Choi-young is the one who apologizes first for acting impulsively, while Yeon-soo's apology is cut short by Choi making a big decision. He's going to work with Nue after all. They only have a week until the art opening. Choi apologizes for being childish, deciding to do his best to get the work prepped in time. Tellingly, the cameras are rolling the entire time as Yeon-soo feels something is up between them. When Yoon-ho and Sol-yi join them at the table, the big elephant in the room is their breakup. The pair stop themselves several times when they mention it, leading to an awkward silence. With time of the essence, the awkward dinner ends, and it's game time. Choi-young sets to work drawing relentlessly for 100 hours. That equates out to roughly 19 hours a day, given how close to the event this is. The cameras are rolling the whole time. The cameras are also filming Yeon-soo too, who does her best to get the paperwork in order for this. A slick montage ensues, skipping between both Yeon-soo and Choi-young as they work to try and get the project done on time. Yeon-soo becomes increasingly concerned about Choi-young's well-being as the time continues to tick by. She heads over to his house with a flask of jujube tea, but when he answers, she can see he looks absolutely exhausted. He's managed to work for 95 hours, meaning he'll do the remaining 5 in front of the audience tomorrow. Just before Yeon-soo leaves, Choi-young holds her arm and asks whether she wants to stay over with him. During the epilogue, we cut back and see Choi-young meet Mr. Jang and agree to collaborate with Nue. As they talk plainly, Mr. Jang admits the harsh truth. He knows that Choi-young has feelings for Yeon-soo, but doesn't want it to jeopardize the project. Mr. Jang also reveals that he likes Yeon-soo, but only as a business partner. Right. Episode 6 of Our Beloved Summer begins back in November 2008. Yeon-soo's family have always been poor, and because of this, making friends and opening up has always been difficult for her. Yeon-soo's classmates interpret this behavior as her being self-centered and not caring, eventually leading to the tough exterior we've come to expect. After all, if you don't let anyone care about you, then no one can get hurt. Except, Choi and Do's grow close to her. Yinsu allows him to as well, and another little montage shows this in more detail. We see Yinsu studying and desperate to find a full-time job. Her poor background and family life serve as shackles, preventing her from flying. Pangs of resentment begin to seep in, especially given her and Choi Young's different paths in life. Debt collectors are a constant reminder of how bad her family have it, while Yoon Soo's grandmother being taken to hospital is the last straw, especially when she receives the bill. She believes that Choi Young has it all figured out, an innocence not swayed by hardships, and unaware of how hard some people have it. The reason Yoon Soo broke up with him is because of this reality and their vastly different lives. In the present, Choi Young awakens and struggles to remember moments from the previous night. Working 95 hours really wiped him out, and he has no recollection of holding Yoon Soo's arm or asking her to stay. The attention here, though, falls on the live drawing show and Choi Young's work. Yoon Soo is asleep in the meeting room, and Choi Young notices her and watches while she's sleeping. When Yoon Soo does awaken, Young pretends he's just arrived in the room. Yoon Soo is flustered, especially when Choi Young asks what happened last night. When she hurries into the main hall, Yoon Soo notices the video of Choi Young working playing up on the big screens. The time arrives and both Choi Young and Yoo are both separately alongside one another, separated by a wall and a different crowd. Watching him work, Yoon Soo is captivated and is impressed given she's never seen this side of Choi Young before. She's surprised, believing he's changed and matured from before. The thing is, he's always been like this. When Choi Young's parents skip away midway through the presentation, they reveal to Yoon Soo that they've always been sad when Young drew by himself. Holding her hands, Choi Young's mum goes on to reveal he didn't take the breakup well. This really affects Yoon Soo, and she skips away to get some privacy. The thing is, all this time, that Yoon Soo believed Choi Young hadn't changed, she's the one who hasn't. Despite paying off all her family's debts and working really hard, Yoon Soo is still the same unfulfilled person she was back in school. Seeing Choi Young flourish, while also maturing and working hard is enough to shift her perspective of him as a carefree and mature guy. After the big show, Choi Young runs into New Jersey outside. He's delighted to be referred to as her friend. She very clearly wants more than that, although he does reject her offer of partying, given he's exhausted after the show. Yoon-ho meanwhile, is still massively enthusiastic about her. Anyone else think there may be a chance Yoon-ho romances with this celeb? Anyway, that evening Yoon Soo and Choi Young catch up. When they talk, Yoon Soo remembers what happened the previous evening. The thing is, Choi Young slept on the sofa, but admitted to her, he's in so much pain. A single tear fell from his face. As Yoon Soo tries to leave, Young stops her, and calls out how cold and standoffish they've been with one another. Of course, all of this is because of Yoon Soo's pride, her pride of not being able to live without Choi Young. As she lowers her head and looks at the floor, the episode comes to a close. Episode 7 of Our Beloved Summer begins with a look at how Choi Young deals with stressful situations. Or, more specifically, doesn't. He has a habit of running away from his problems, and we see that from elementary school all the way through to present day. According to Choi Young, this is just a reasonable decision, and he doesn't even see it as running away. In the present, off the back of his big drawing demonstration, a celebration is about to get underway. And of course, Choi Young runs away again. Only, Yoon Soo also goes AWOL as well. With Yoon Ho and Sol Yi there twiddling their thumbs, they debate over where the pair may be and if they're together. They're not though, but left to their own devices, they decide to drink the bottles of wine. After all, it would be a shame to waste them, wouldn't it? Meanwhile, Jae Young heads to work and notices they've been assigned a brand new writer. This woman is Lee Min Kyung, and she throws shade at the upcoming documentary, unsure exactly what Jae Young's angle is in all this. She watched the old documentary before coming into this, and believes there's something simmering between Yoon Soo and Choi Young. Looking at the new documentary, that's not there. So naturally, she questions Jae Young's filming, and whether there could be more to this than meets the eye. So naturally, she comes up with a big draft script for the documentary. When she finds out about Choi Young running away though, she implores Jae Young to bring them back and this time, makes sure they stay. Even if that means locking them up or kidnapping them. Figuratively speaking though, right, Lee Min Kyung right. By chance, the pair do run into one another at the library. It's incredibly awkward and absolutely hilarious. Yoon Soo feels embarrassed as she cried in front of Choi Young, but when he learns how embarrassed she is, and isn't running away, it makes him reconsider his actions. The two do hash out their issues, with Choi Young unhappy with Yoon Soo, always being the one in control and making all the decisions. This time though he decides to walk away. When he does, New Jersey and Yoon Ho send him a video message wishing him congrats on his success story. The thing is, the pair have been drinking wine together and are very drunk. What begins as a nice message soon turns into crying. Meanwhile, New Jersey organizes a charity event, but the commenters who show up to help have an ulterior motive. They're all doing this to avoid being sued and just pretending to be happy. They're only sucking up because they know that last year those who volunteered were let off. As a whole table of people discuss this, New Jersey happens to be just round the corner, and she hears the whole thing. New Jersey puts her foot down and confronts them after the day's events, deciding she's not going to drop the charges against these malicious commenters after all. When she eventually drives away, she runs into Choi-young, and the pair head to the park together. There, a couple of kids show up who happen to be fans of New Jersey. Choi-young admires her patience and comments how difficult it must be to juggle all of this. While the pair get along really well, Yoon-soo shows up and sees them together from afar. At least until Jae-young appears. New Jersey finally breaks the news that she likes Choi-young, who is shell-shocked when he finds out. She also calls him Tofu, the name of her dog, and suggests they should hang out together again soon. Interestingly, Yoon-soo and Jae-young also hang out, after taking a very drunk Sol-yi over to Yoon-soo's to crash. As Yoon-soo watches from afar, Jae-young and her grandmother get on really well. Could there be romance here, I wonder? In the morning, Jae-young makes his decision along with Ms. Lee, and they bring Choi-young and Yoon-soo up to a secluded cabin in the middle of nowhere to film. They've got 3 days together, and this time, there's no running. Episode 8 of Our Beloved Summer begins with Choi-young and Yoon-soo alone up at this vacation home. Choi-young isn't exactly thrilled with this, unenthusiastically answering the questions Jae-young presents to him. One of these though happens to be a question about past trips. Now, Choi-young has mixed feelings about a trip to Suwon he took with Yoon-soo. Yoon-soo had a knack for doing whatever she wanted back then, telling Choi-young this was their final trip together. This caused him to become really anxious and uncomfortable the whole time, believing a breakup was imminent. It wasn't, as it turns out. At the end of this trip, Yoon-soo opened up and caught him off guard completely, admitting that she loves him. In the present, Jae-young and his team get to work filming, with both Sol-yi and Yoon-ho, both interviewed over their feelings toward Yoon-soo and Choi-young's estranged relationship. This secluded spot has had its intended reaction though, with the pair back on another trip. Just like they promised all those years back, they're together again on a longer trip. Of course, not under the same circumstances. Things are still tense and on edge between the two, and for now they decide to give one another some space. However, Yoon-soo is still hung up over Choi-young's ties with New Jersey. News articles online about their pairing doesn't help either. This only exacerbates the tensions between the men in front of the camera. The pair have trouble conversing. While jealous pangs begin to spring up from Yoon-soo toward New Jersey and Choi-young spending time together, the same can be said from Choi-young. When he learns that Yoon-soo and Jae-young are heading out together, with the camera no less, he tries in vain to hide his jealousy. Now, Jae-young is a little sly here and hides his true feelings behind the camera, which is a little subjective to say the least. It does seem a bit shifty that he's moving on his best friend's ex-flame. The pair do have a good time together though, and undoubtedly have great chemistry too, riding bikes together, and getting some decent establishing shots for the documentary in the process. When they relax on a bench and enjoy the view, an elderly couple pass and believe that they're an item. Jae-young doesn't correct them, and Yoon-soo's wry smile after seems to hint she knows he has feelings for her. He shrugs it off though and claims he was just being polite. In their absence, that leaves Chae-ran to film Choi-young while he's drawing. As they talk about the original documentary, she reveals the exact moment he developed feelings for Yoon-soo. This time though she's keeping quiet and instead asks him to try and liven up in front of the cameras. Smiling, Choi-young promises to do his best. When Jae-young and Yoon-soo return when the sun is down, no less Choi-young struggles to shake off his jealousy. Awkwardness inevitably ensues at dinner that afternoon, especially when Yoon-soo admits she had a nap in the middle of the day. Choi-young though points out that she always said she hated people who took naps. With Choi-young and Yoon-soo away at their vacation home, New Jersey shows at Young's place. Her parents' voice call with the group as New Jersey appears on screen to say hello. When Yoon-soo sees, you can see her heart literally sink. It'll be interesting to see if the camera has picked up on this, but it's obvious these little romance couple pairings are bringing up old, unresolved feelings. That is especially true that night as Yoon-soo and Choi-young both feel the proverbial hammer blow of their emotions. In the morning, Yoon-soo heads into Choi-young's room while he's asleep. She notices a beautiful drawing of the vacation house on the desk, and thinks about brushing the hair out of his face. Instead, Choi Young reaches out tentatively and holds her hand. Yin-soo pulls away. As she heads out for a morning stroll, Yin-soo ends up napping on a bench and awakens with a familiar sense of déjà vu. It's raining, she has no umbrella, and she's stuck with nowhere to go. And just like the past, it's Choi Young in the distance who appears like a knight in shining armor with an umbrella. Should I leave or stay? Yin-soo asks, as Choi Young instinctively leans forward, drops the umbrella and kisses her. Go on. Episode 9 of Our Beloved Summer begins with us following Jae-young, who reflects back on his past. Specifically on his hidden plan. He didn't want to get involved with Yin-soo, and remained determined not to interfere with Choi Young and Yin-soo's growing romance. He tried to meet other people and move on, but when Yin-soo appeared in front of him again, all those years later, his carefully crafted plan crumbled. In fact, Jae-young now questions whether he even needs a plan anymore, given Choi Young and Yin-soo are together. At least, that's what he thinks anyway. He has no knowledge of the kiss. Following their big kiss in the rain, Yin-soo struggles to concentrate at work. For 5 days, since she returned from her weekend break, she's been distracted. And she's not the only one either. Choi Young too is feeling under the weather. His feelings are more toward feeling alone again after being with Yin-soo. Their obvious spark at the getaway house has stirred old feelings, and since then they've both run back home again, trying to make sense of their conflicted feelings. While all this is going on, Jae-young continues to push the boundaries. He messages Yin-soo with a cheeky video of her in the rain. It's enough to start a conversation, but when he asks if Yin-soo has had dinner, he doesn't get a reply. Take a hint, Jae-young. Yin-soo instead heads over to Sol-yee's bar and ends up stabbing her chicken meal thoughtfully. Sol-yee knows about the kiss, but when she teases her about Choi Young's feelings, Sol-yee suddenly realizes that Yin-soo wants to get back with him. She's had these thoughts for a while now, but has been keeping it to herself and hiding this. The roles seem to be reversed, in a cruel twist of fate. Yin-soo heads over to Choi Young's place and finds him completely nonchalant to the whole event. He's not going to apologize for what happened and instead, asks if they can be friends. Given they've never tried being friends before, he thinks they could be a good pairing. But can they really be friends without spilling over to lovers? I have my doubts. So too does Yin-soo, as it happens, who decides she's going to stay over. After all, as their friends it shouldn't be a problem, right? Yin-soo continues to push the boundaries of their friendship, wearing Choi Young's clothes and encouraging him to play video games. She also hilariously keeps referencing them as friends too. Choi Young clearly likes Yin-soo's company, and as Yoon-ho rings with plans for an interview, he feigns being ill and decides to hang out with Yin-soo instead, playing video games. While playing, New Jersey rings and Yin-soo begins questioning what's going on between him and the famous singer, given they're quite close. In retaliation, Choi Young asks the same thing regarding Jae-young. She scoffs at the ludicrous idea though, given she doesn't see him in that way. Now, Jae-young obviously still likes Yin-soo, and that much is especially apparent at work. When he sits down with Chae-ran, he admits to her that he does like Yin-soo. She sticks up for him though, pointing out one can't control their own feelings. Jae-young is certainly taken aback and left with plenty to think about. Meanwhile, Yin-soo winds up seeing a message from Yoon-ho on his phone, confirming Choi Young has cancelled the interview. This gets her thinking, as she heads down into Choi Young's basement and starts looking at all his drawings. When Choi Young appears, she calls him out for his hot and cold behavior, wanting to know the truth. Only, while they talk, Jae-young appears at the Episode 10 of Our Beloved Summer begins with a look at New Jersey. She discusses her professional life in the limelight, how she's passionate and bubbly. At least, that's the persona she puts on for the public anyway. In reality, she has a soft spot for Choi Young, seemingly drawn to him by fate thanks to a pop-up ad on a news article bringing his drawings to her attention. Showing up at the art gallery, she's unaware that he's an artist. She admits to Choi Young that she's an admirer of Go-on's work, as a cute chat between the two ensues. It doesn't take long for New Jersey to realize he's the one responsible for the drawing. She also realizes that he's far more interesting than she first thought, leading to the pair growing closer together. Or at least New Jersey's feelings growing closer to him. Back in the present, Choi Young and Yin-soo blag their way through the awkward encounter, with Choi Young eventually ushering Yin-soo away, encouraging the young woman to get a bus home. When she shows up, her grandma and Sol-yee are already there, waiting for her. Together, they conspire to learn exactly what Yin-soo has been up to. Sol-yee soon susses out that her friend has a crush on Choi Young, proceeding to tease her about it that night in bed. Meanwhile, Jae-young and Choi Young eat food together, but the former clearly can't stop thinking about Yin-soo in all this time. In fact, he ends up having an early morning and setting out to work, filming more for the documentary. Yoon-soo and Choi-young both show up at the same time, just as New Jersey begins talking about Choi-young. This, of course, catches us up to the epilogue at the end of the previous episode. When New Jersey finishes, she approaches Choi-young and Yoon-soo, admitting that she's heading off on a date with Choi-young. This certainly ruffles Yoon-soo's feathers, awkwardly watching him leave. Jae-young sees this and immediately suggests they should go out to eat together as well. On the walk back to the Young household, Yoon-soo can't stop talking about Choi-young. When Jae-young's mum appears right off the back of this, Jae-young decides to cancel plans for lunch. He walks away from his mum, but she follows after him. Alone, she pleads with Jae-young to come home. Instead, he tells her to be her usual self and ignore Choi-young's family. At lunch, Choi-young learns that New Jersey suffers from a lot of stress that comes with being famous. Choi-young is seeing this for the first time, typified by a couple of ladies rudely discussing whether New Jersey has had plastic surgery and how skinny she is. Choi-young tries to cheer her up though, which does seems to do the trick. What they weren't banking on, though, are reporters hanging around outside, hungry to snap a shot of the two together. After New Jersey opens up, Choi-young does the same on the drive back. He discusses his past romantic woes and how he and Yoon-soo are trying to be friends again after breaking up. Both dates do well to shed light on where Yoon-soo and Choi-young's desires lie. For Yoon-soo, she's still torn over being told to stay friends. For Choi-young, he refuses New Jersey's offer of heading up to her place, as he clearly still likes Yoon-soo and has trouble warming up to people. That much is especially true later on when Choi-young ends up at Yoon-soo's place for dinner with Yoon-soo's grandma. It's awkward, and even more so when the old lady hilariously talks outright about Choi-young's pros and cons. Choi-young does stay for the whole meal though, but when he leaves, Yoon-soo openly admits to her grandmother what's going on. She still likes Choi-young, but it's her fault they're not together. As Yoon-soo struggles with this newfound friendship, she begins sobbing, allowing her grandma to hug her in a really tender, heartwarming moment between the pair. That night, Jae-young complicates matters considerably. In the street, he runs into Yoon-soo and mentions how it's his birthday. His mother has got him some peaches and seemingly forgotten, or not wanting to remember, that he's allergic and almost died in the past when he tried to eat one. This only reinforces how alone Jae-young feels, leaving Yoon-soo at a bit of an awkward crossroads, unsure what to do with this news. As the episode closes out, Choi-young winds up watching some of the edited footage Jae-young has been working on, which appears to be a lot of compiled clips of Yoon-soo. This does seem to indicate that Choi-young is finally figuring out that his best friend has a crush on Yoon-soo. This makes the epilogue that much more bittersweet too, as Jae-young and Choi-young spend numerous nights together in the past. Jae-young's mum has a habit of coming and going as she pleases, and this estranged relationship starts to shed crucial light on how alone Jae-young has been. Episode 11 of Our Beloved Summer begins with Choi-young reflecting on the breakup with Yoon-soo once more. This time it's given more context, specifically how Choi-young was on the verge of leaving and asking Yoon-soo to study abroad with him. This all feeds back into the life of a dog from his past called Jongchong, his mannerisms he likens to his own. The dog is afraid to go outside and shies away from big gatherings and crowds. This is important to note as it's something that comes back later on in the episode. Meanwhile, pictures of New Jersey and Choi-young's meeting begin to circulate online. CEO Kang believes this could be good for their PR image, given Choi has a solid reputation. For now, the CEO decides to overlook this hiccup in judgment from New Jersey. The celebrity scoffs at the CEO and tells her boss to stop treating her like a kid. When Yoon-soo sees this same news, she hurriedly shuts her laptop. Solia rings and tries to probe over exactly how she feels, but Yoon-soo remains quietly guarded on the topic. When she goes for a drive, a big billboard with New Jersey's advert flashes up, causing her to question Choi-young's feelings. Choi-young meanwhile tells Yoon-ho the truth that they're not dating and are just friends. Jae-young heads to the office and learns that Choi was there earlier on, and specifically, hanging around in the editing room. Chae-ran tries to talk Jae-young around, pointing out that it was his birthday yesterday and encouraging him to go out for dinner with her. Although he initially refuses, she's pretty persistent and he eventually agrees. Unfortunately, they're not alone, and as the other employees from the SBBS special are there too, things don't go to plan. Specifically, thanks to Lee Min-kyung realizing that Jae-young likes Yoon-soo. Min-kyung urges him to go back and re-edit the video, clearly concerned that his feelings could be changing the way this video is shot. That evening, Yoon-soo heads over to Choi-young's place with bags full of food. Yoon-ho hurries her inside, but Chow happens to be out. While she waits, New Jersey happens to head over too. The conversation is awkward, especially when New Jersey quizzes whether she's getting in the way of Soo and Choi-young. The thing is, regardless of what she says, New Jersey isn't going to give him up without a fight, and she knows that. So naturally, when Choi-young heads home and finds a trail of jujube fruits, along with a note from New Jersey outside, he contemplates what this means. And this is only exacerbated further when Jae-young heads over, drunk. He rambles about his feelings, eventually scoffing on the sofa when Choi-young tells him to go to sleep. In the morning, Choi-young doesn't show up to their filming shoot. Jae-young feels guilty, believing he may be the one to blame for this. In reality, there's more going on here, linking back to the past. He heads over to see Jong-jong. He's out for walks now and no longer hates the outdoors. The dog has grown and changed, a metaphor for how Choi-young has also changed. He just needs the courage to take that next step. This helps Choi-young take a better look at his life, and specifically what's been going on with Soo. He doesn't think he's worthy of being with her, but a chat with Soo's grandmother helps him to realize that actually, she's every bit in love with him as he is with her. Soo eventually catches up with Choi-young that night, allowing the pair to hash out their differences in private. Their conversation has been coming for a while, since their kiss several episodes back. After some Dutch courage, given the 3 bottles of soju, Soo opens up and tells him she doesn't want to be his friend. "I miss you, Soo. I've always missed you," Choi-young suddenly says, interrupting her. He finally has the courage to say what he feels and urges her to keep loving him. With tears in their eyes, Soo. Episode 12 of Our Beloved Summer begins with us reflecting on the time between Soo and Choi-young at school. With memories stitched together in a beautiful montage, this soon dissolves away as we return to the fateful moment between Soo and Choi-young at the restaurant. After that big confession last episode, the pair head home. Choi-young's past has been full of heartache, and we see more of it here. It turns out his parents actually adopted him, but around the same time every year they mourn the loss of their own child, weeping in the lounge. Choi-young saw them weeping together one night, which is what started his bad dreams about being abandoned. This also goes some way to explain why the breakup affected Choi-young so bad, given he interpreted what happened as Soo abandoning him too. In the morning, Soo bumps into Choi-young outside who clearly hasn't slept, given he keeps yawning. Soo mothers him, very clearly concerned for his well-being. Choi-young spontaneously holds her against the wall and queries whether she can take a day off. She won't, as it turns out, but they do both confirm that they're dating. This also has a knock-on effect of allowing Choi-young to be more open with his parents too. He tells them to invite him along to their countryside trip next time. While this is going on, Jae-young continues to edit the video, but he's stubborn and clearly exhausted. So naturally, Yoon Chae-ran is concerned. After checking Jae-young's vitals, realizes that he's ill. Chae-ran decides to take over, leaving Jae-young dumbfounded. Even Mr. Park can tell that she likes him, and when he realizes Jae-young hasn't noticed, he calls him a lost cause. When Jae-young heads home to rest, Choi-young arrives to hash out their problems. There's not really much development there though if I'm honest, and much like before Jae-young is stubborn and asks whether Choi-young wants a congratulations from him. Well, no, he's not going to do that. Instead, Jae-young is just going to stay quiet. The next day, Choi-young and Soo arrange to meet at the weekend, but it's strangely awkward. Both of them start to second-guess themselves, eventually leading to Choi-young showing up at Soo's work as a surprise. The pair hug outside, as Choi-young comments to himself that he definitely couldn't wait until the weekend to see her. That night, the pair discuss what's happened between them. It's a really cute conversation, especially when they end up together outside Soo's house giggling. While this is going on, New Jersey invites Jae-young for drinks, but she ends up blind drunk, rambling on about how much she likes Choi-young. She admits she feels worthless for getting between them, something Jae-young knows all too well, and convinces her that she can give up on Choi-young. Although he doesn't say much, Jae-young's advice certainly helps New Jersey gain some perspective. Meanwhile, Soo and Choi-young eventually head over to the latter's house, kissing passionately on the sofa. Episode 13 of Our Beloved Summer begins with Choi-young and Soo spending time together while they're dating. Embracing Soo's way of life is something Choi-young's not accustomed to, but he remains determined to embrace this. Both he and Soo remains cautiously optimistic over their future. While Choi-young keeps his fantasies to himself, Soo searches online for relationship advice, determined not to make the same mistakes again. Meanwhile, Jae-young shows off the first draft of the documentary to the team. Ms. Kim is happy, as are the others too, who decide to run with this after a bit of editing of course. While the gang all want to go out and celebrate, Jae-young remains guarded and trying not to let his emotions get the better of him, snatching up his phone and leaving the room. Elsewhere, New Jersey prepares for the 10-year anniversary for her fans, deciding to film a special video for them. During her interview, she's asked about her dating life and what's happening regarding Choi-young. She reaches out and asks the public not to jump to conclusions, and points out how she's grown distant with Choi-young as a result of this. Yoon-ho ends up seeing this broadcast while he's over at Choi-young's place. He speaks to his client and mentions how concerned he is. Not necessarily with New Jersey, but more so with Yoon-soo. After all, he was there to see the state Choi-young became after the breakup. He's concerned things could end up ugly again. In order to make him feel better, Choi-young agrees to talk to Yoon-ho about a raise. Well, Yoon-ho immediately jumps in with 30%, but Choi-young's incredulous look sees him instantly drop his own offer to 20%. That night, Choi-young waits for Yoon-soo outside work. He's chivalrous and helps her into the car, but Yoon-soo is not herself. After asking one of her work colleagues for dating advice, Yoon-soo hilariously takes this wildly out of hand, and Choi-young consents it. Eventually the pair air out their problems, with Yoon-soo pointing out the article she's been reading. Choi-young holds her hand and implores Yoon-soo to be herself, admitting that she's unlike anyone else, and they should redo their date again, properly this time. And they do just that, heading to Sol-yee's restaurant instead. In the morning, Choi-young messages New Jersey and thanks her for the article and what she said on the interview. Despite it taking days to message back, New Jersey tries in vain to stop herself from replying immediately, given her keen interest in him. So to stop herself, she goes to extreme measures to hide her phone. Jae-young remains obsessed with his documentary. He works long hours, refuses to leave the editing room, and pushes away everyone who tries to check up on him. That is, until Yoon-soo arrives. She calls him out for skipping meals and grabs his hand, forcing him outside to go and eat dinner. Jae-young admits he's a mess, but does his best to be polite with her. Through it all though, he struggles to open up and tell her the truth about how he feels. Meanwhile, Sol-yee heads out on her blind date, but it doesn't go to plan. It's slightly awkward, especially when the older guy tells her he didn't realize what the time was, despite it being really early. The thing is, Yoon-ho obviously has the hots for her, and this causes a bit of awkwardness before she heads out for it. When Sol-yee rushes back to her restaurant, believing she's forgotten about the clams, Yoon-ho is there helping to sort them out. She immediately starts looking at him in a different light, even suggesting that they drink all the soju in the fridge together, and eat clams too. New Jersey eventually heads over to see Choi-young in person. She only came over to talk about the interview, and clear the air, but things are awkward between them after her confession about licking him. New Jersey makes a stand, and decides that she's going to reject him outright. That also means no longer being friends with him, given her feelings. Just before leaving, New Jersey tells him to ring her, if he and Yoon-soo break up again. As she turns to leave, New Jersey clearly looks disappointed. Meanwhile, Jae-young heads back to the editing room with Yoon-soo after eating. Only, while he stares at her, Chae-ran shows up with takeaway. She sees the pair together in the editing room and she's crushed. Yoon-soo later visits Choi-young at his house, and finds a brochure for an architecture school in his book. Choi-young has his reservations about going, and even admits that he doesn't have a university degree. The only reason he went in the first place is for her, and besides, he hasn't needed it to make his career a success. For Yoon-soo though, she's pretty shocked by this turn of events. As the pair sit together, Choi-young asks openly about exactly why they broke up in the past. During the epilogue, Chae-ran calls out Jae-young's affection for Yoon-soo, and likens it to Love Actually. In particular, the infamous scene with the placards. She asks how his story is going to end, but Jae-young simply tells her he's in a documentary, not a movie. Episode 14 of Our Beloved Summer starts with Yoon-soo reflecting on her past. Specifically, how she grew up poor, and kept many of the other girls at school at arm's length. Not only that, she also practiced breaking up with Choi-young in the mirror, struggling to compose herself and hold back her tears. The thing is, Yoon-soo actually did tell Choi-young about a rough financial crisis her family were going through post-breakup. During a drunken phone call, Choi-young dropped his phone and missed hearing the most crucial parts of the conversation. Fast forward to the present, and we return to Yoon-soo and Choi-young, with the latter determined to find out why they really broke up. Yoon-soo deflects the question though, claiming she was really tired looking for a part-time job and walks away. The thing is, Yoon-soo's grandmother is not afraid to tell him the truth. When Choi-young heads over to her place, she opens up and reveals everything. She mentions Ian Su's affection for him and urges Choi Young to be by her side for a long time. The first episode of the documentary is released and it's a big success. The ratings are higher than they've been in a while and Park Dong-il is super excited. Jae-young keeps a level head though, reminding him this is just the first episode. The episode is also watched by those at Ian Su's workplace, who admire Ian Su and comment how cute she is. The gang are flustered when they notice Ian Su behind them, who urges them all to focus on their upcoming project. She also forbids them from talking about the documentary at work too. Intending to break the cycle from the past, Ian Su agrees to head out with them on a work night. They're absolutely ecstatic, and can hardly contain their excitement. The thin sliver of a smile crosses Ian Su's face. The documentary is big news and Sol Yee's ex, Jin Seop, shows up after hearing her interview. He claims he really missed her, and believes she misses him too, after what she said. When Yoon-ho appears in the middle of this, things are awkward. Jin Seop is eventually ushered out, but Yoon-ho is obviously a bit jealous. That night, she hears Jin Seo talking on the phone, mentioning swindling money out of Sol Yee, and treating her like a sucker. He also mentions how she belongs to the bank, and is swimming in debt. Now, Sol Yee actually overhears a part of this conversation, but only the beginning bit about her being taken. She believes he chivalrously stuck up for her, and it's super cute when the pair interact with one another inside after. New Jersey and Jae-young end up going for food together, where the former discusses how she doesn't really have any friends. Jae-young offers some words of encouragement, understanding the pain of trying to get over someone you care about. This helps to comfort her, but as she steers the conversation around to Choi-young and what he's been up to recently, Jae-young admits he hasn't spoken to his friend recently and leaves. In the wake of all this drama, Choi-young walks Ian Su home from her night out. He makes a promise with himself to be with her for a long time. When she heads home, Ian Su finds a leaflet for specialist medical services in her grandmother's jacket. Believing she's going to leave her soon, Ian Su starts to grow worried. In a bid to try and keep her grandmother around, Ian Su decides to treat her to a trip away. She's going to take a few days off from work and urges her not to leave. She doesn't want to be alone. During the epilogue, Jae-young returns home to his mother who wants him to film her. Why? Well, it turns out she's going to die soon, so she wants him to film her before she's. Episode 15 of Our Beloved Summer starts with Jae-young reflecting on his past. Staying up to wait for his mum, he excitedly tells her he's made a new friend. Only, she's completely disinterested, and tells him to go to bed instead. This is a harsh reminder of how he's craving affection from her and receiving nothing. This is only exacerbated by Choi-young's close relationship with his parents, with Jae-young observing their closeness. Most of Jae-young's childhood he's grown up feeling alone. Jae-young's mum blames her son for living a pathetic life, which she admits to him, while drinking soju one night. It's disgusting and heartbreaking, and completely understandable why Jae-young has turned out the way he has. Personally, it would have been nice to receive this flashback 10 episodes ago, but it's an important scene to understanding his character nonetheless. In the present, we skip back to Choi-young who heads out and buys some nice gifts for Ian Su. When he returns home, she happens to be asleep on the sofa. As she wakes up, Choi-young gives her the gifts he's bought, putting emphasis on how long he waited at the shop. Ian Su decides they should hang out together, watching random TV and drawing Jongjeong. Choi-young continues to spoil her, buying boxes full of gifts for Ian Su. Yoon-ho worries that too many gifts could be overwhelming, but he's not deterred. However, the big drive here is Choi-young's exhibit, which is coming up very soon. Ian Su is going to hold off and visit on the final day, making sure she doesn't take the limelight away from him, given her relationship with him. Meanwhile, Sol Yee continues to grow affectionate over Yoon-ho. He fails to see the signs though, despite talking softly to him and playing with her hair. Anyway, when he hands over the invitation, we skip across to New Jersey who also contemplates whether to go to the exhibit or not. Jae-young throws himself into his work. He's been unhealthily obsessing over the documentary for a while now, but here we understand why. He obviously doesn't want to return home, given his mum's diagnosis and Chae-ran is worried. Ms. Lee convinces her to give him some space, but things are hitting Jae-young hard. Chae-ran eventually sits down with Jae-young and calls him out for moping. She believes that all of this is because of Ian Su, unaware of what's happening with his mum. He's standoffish and refuses to open up. Eventually he smiles thinly and thanks her for worrying. However, it doesn't do anything to quell her feelings for him. The exhibition goes ahead, and after ringing Ian's suit just before, Choi Young faces the press and greets all the different visitors who marvel at his work. This exhibit is the talk of the town, with two of Ian Su's colleagues discussing how good it was. In the background, she notices two school kids running about, and it makes her reminisce on school moments with Choi Young in the library. Eventually Ian Su admits to the pair that Choi Young is her boyfriend. On the final day, Ian Su heads to the exhibition, but New Jersey shows up first. The thing is, she's actually bought all the tickets for herself, and that certainly catches Choi Young off guard. She shakes hands with him as a sign of their friendship, pointing out that making an impression is far more her jam than actually spending a lot of time together. Okay then. It catches Choi Young off guard, and that's just as well, because Ian Su isn't able to reach the exhibition on time. Her grandmother is ill, and she's called away to hospital. There's a really beautiful, but heart-wrenching moment in the hospital, as Ian Su's grandmother encourages Ian Su to keep people close to her and enjoy her life. She also tells Ian Su not to lie like she has. In her absence, Choi Young speaks to Nue, who shows up at the exhibition and scoffs at Choi Young's lack of advancement. He openly admits to stealing his paintings too. Yunho eventually rocks up and promises to tell the reporters everything. The thing is, Nue's words cut deep, as he claims to pity Choi Young and scoffs at how empty the paintings are. Choi Young swallows hard before eventually heading out for drinks with Jae Young. Despite them being friends, Jae Young's absence from the exhibition has certainly annoyed him. When he finds out Jae Young's mum is going to pass away, Choi Young's mood changes instantly. Jae Young admits he doesn't feel sad about his mum's death, which obviously raises a myriad of emotions for him. When Choi Young heads home, he finds Ian Su sitting outside on her own. She's worried she's ruined everything and apologizes. Choi Young reassures her though, telling Ian Su she's not going to ruin anything, as she admits to being in so much pain. As Choi Young holds her hands, the pair head inside. Why did Nue's words affect Choi Young so much? Episode 16 of Our Beloved Summer begins the finale with Choi Young still reeling over Nue's words last episode. The thing is, Choi Young has always felt like he's living a borrowed life after being abandoned and then adopted. Throwing himself into his drawing, Choi Young has felt like he's living an empty life, using his art as an excuse to bury his own insecurities and issues. The thing is, Nue hit the nail on the head. His work does lack the emotion behind it, and it's taken these harsh critiques to see it. What is Ian Su's choice? After all this time, we cut back to the present as Choi Young makes a big decision. He's going to start afresh, setting his sights on studying overseas, but wanting Ian Su by his side while he does. It's a massive decision, one that sees Ian Su decide to give it some thought. This decision is made all the more difficult by Ian Su offered her own opportunity at work. She's offered a lucrative position of transferring to Paris to work with the team over there. And that, of course, would also put her closer to Choi Young, given his school is there too. All of her colleagues convince Ian Su to put herself first for a change, and after what her grandmother said about living her own life, it's all boiling down to a huge life-changing choice for her too. What helps Jae Young turn a corner in his life? While this is going on, Yunho despairs over Choi Young leaving. That wailing is only exacerbated when his severance pay comes through, which is way more than he expected. When Sul-yi sees it too, she gasps in shock. Jae Young heads out with Park Dong-il, who encourages him to start finding the beauty in everyday life. It's something he's struggled with for most of this season, with last episode's flashbacks showing him scoffing at taking pictures of the market. He's encouraged to look at the world through the lens of the camera, presenting life as it is. Dong-il also mentions the lack of photos Jae Young has of his mum. For Sung-il, he only has one picture of his mother, and that's a group picture. He's thankful for that, but urges Jae Young not to waste his life procrastinating, convincing him to seize the moment. Jae Young eventually visits his mum in hospital. There, she opens up, and admits she decided to leave originally, because she was afraid that he'd turn out as miserable as she was. So she abandoned him. Jae Young scoffs at her explanation, and admits he won't forgive her for what she's put him through. No level of suffering can forgive what she's done. And yet, she's still his mum. He agrees to continue seeing her, but it's clear there's a lot of baggage between the two. What happens with Choi Young and his mum? Does he reveal the truth about his feelings? Choi Young heads home and speaks to his mum, who admits that she actually knew about Choi Young being aware of her son. For her though, Choi Young is her family. With tears stinging his eyes, he admits he was afraid he wouldn't live up to their lofty standards and be good like them. Lee Inoke smiles warmly and tells Choi Young that they've never been disappointed in him. What choices do Ian Su and Choi Young make? With the air cleared, Choi Young decides to do what he needs to do to be a better person. So too does Yoon Soo, as it turns out, who decides she's going to follow her heart. The things is, Yoon Soo never has, and through some flashbacks we see she's always gone with the flow, but she's still had some good moments regardless of that. The only person who hasn't seen that is herself. Now that she's living her best life, Yoon Soo decides she's going to stick with her current life and enjoy it for longer. Choi Young meanwhile, is dead set on studying abroad. With the pair bound for different destinies, Choi Young promises to return and asks her to wait for him. She agrees to do just that, as the pair make their mature choices to better both their lives. Does Choi Young tell Yoon Soo he loves her? Jae Young focuses on himself and even films a documentary about his favorite moments involving his mum. With a smile crossing his face, reminiscing on those rare moments where he and his mum shared time together, she sees him from afar and seems to brighten up a bit. Choi Young eventually studies abroad, while Yoon Soo dives headfirst into her work. The pair continue to communicate over the phone, although Choi Young eventually surprises her by arriving in the street, just to tell her he loves her. It's a really beautiful moment, and Yoon Soo is shocked to see him again. The pair embrace, as Yoon Soo urges him to hurry up and return. What happens during the time jump? We then jump forward 2 years later. Chae-ran and Jae Young drive together with the latter in a much better place. He's smiling, and even more so when he finds out she likes him. They're en route to a book donation event, where Sol-yi and Yoon-ho are both prepping everything ready for the big event together. Jae Young is filming too, and when Yoon Soo and Choi Young show up, he warmly smiles at them. He's got over his crush on Yoon Soo, and appears to be living his best life as well. Alone, Choi Young makes a bold decision and decides his story with Yoon Soo hasn't ended yet. He asks her to marry him. How does our beloved summer end? During the epilogue, Jae Young approaches the happy couple and decides they should film another documentary. Now that they're getting married, he thinks they should film another docu-series. Together, they both face the camera and tell the viewers that they're married. The last episode ending. Our beloved summer bows out with a sweet ending that wraps up all the big plot points and gives our characters a conclusive finish. A lot of this drama has been focused on healing old wounds and getting one's life in order before moving on. With that in mind, this K-drama has been thematically on point, and this final chapter rounds all of that out nicely. Seeing Jae Young's character actually grow at the end is a nice inclusion, even if he's been severely underutilized for large bouts of this show. Likewise, Choi Young and Yoon Soo both grow and are much more mature than they were originally, with their spirits and heads held high for the future. In the end, the characters have really helped this show grow, and the final scenes with Choi Young admitting that he loves Yoon Soo is heartwarming and certainly welcome. The story does wrap up with plenty of satisfying moments for all the different characters, although it would have been nice to see more scenes involving Yoon-ho and Sol-yi together. Whether there will be a second season to this is unknown at this point, but either way, there's certainly plenty to like with this show, which ends with a sweet treat of a finale.